Hello, today I'm looking at a wine that caught my attention in a wine shop. The reason for that is its name. It's one I had come across before, but this is the beautifully named The Death of Von Tempsky. It's a wine from Carrick, from Central Otago. It's the 2020 vintage, and in fact it's a Riesling, although they don't actually state that it's a Riesling in bold on the label. It's simply given that quite extraordinary name, The Death of Von Tempsky. This is a natural wine. It's a wine that's been made with extended skin contact, so it's fair to refer to this as an orange wine. So Carrick are a small single estate wine producer based in the Banockburn sub-region of Central Otago, so Central Otago down towards the southern end of New Zealand's South Island. And here Carrick produce a small collection of Pinot Noirs, Chardonnays and Rieslings. The estate was founded in 1994 by a couple, Barbara Robertson-Green and her husband Steve Green, and the inaugural vintage was released in 2000. And then the winery building and their restaurant opened in 2002. Now they've subsequently sold the estate since 2021. It's been owned by Alison and Tony Cleland. So perhaps first of all I should try and explain the curious name, The Death of Von Tempsky. Evidently Gustavus von Tempsky was a Prussian who'd come to New Zealand in 1862 with his family. He was from a Prussian noble family. He seems to have been a talented man. He was known as a writer, a journalist, a painter. He was flamboyant and he was known as a charismatic leader. He came to serve as a major in locally raised New Zealand forces during the Anglo-Maori or land wars here in New Zealand. So Von Tempsky was killed in 1868 during an unsuccessful attack on a Maori fortification, a pa. But evidently he was so respected by his enemies that they took his body and gave him a ceremonial cremation in respect of what they'd seen as his bravery and his honour as an enemy. So perhaps I should explain quite how the death of a Prussian nobleman in the Taranaki and the North Island in the 1860s came to lead to the name of a wine being produced in the South Island over 140 years later. Needs a little explanation. Evidently Steve Green, one of the original owners of Carrick, was a collector of art, and that's what's on the label there. It's a lithograph called The Death of Von Tempsky, and this is a scene that imagines the hero not dying in Taranaki but actually dying in Troy. And evidently Steve saw this as a confluence of the modern and the ancient, and that's the way he also saw this Riesling, it being very traditionally made but yet in a modern winery, hence the naming of this wine, The Death of Von Tempsky. So Carrick's vineyards, from which this comes from, are all planted on the banks of the Kawarau River in Banockburn. Here you get very low fertility, alluvial, glacial soils, predominantly gravel, so they actually have to work quite hard to try and get some organic matter in here to help give the soils a bit of life. So there's a routine certainly of planting cover crops such as clover, mustard and white oats. So you see those growing between the rows of the vine and being ploughed back into the earth every year. So the fruit for this wine comes from a single vineyard, one of Carrick's vineyards, the Cairnmuir Vineyard. As I say, that's in Bannockburn. Evidently it is certified by the Sustainable Wine Growing New Zealand regulations, and also it's certified as being organically farmed, an organisation called BioGrow. The fruit here was hand-picked. They don't give a date, but they said it was a warm afternoon in early April 2020. As far as the winemaking is concerned, minimal intervention is being practiced here. The fruit was destemmed and it was crushed. Fermentation went on entirely using the indigenous yeasts that had made their way into the winery on the fruit or were already operating in the winery. Fermentation went on the skins, and that lasted for about 16 days. Now the unpressed fruit was then left to macerate in the wine for no less than 170 days. All this process is going on in stainless steel tanks, so there's no influence of oak, and actually pressing took place on the date of the spring equinox. So they say the wine was bottled with absolutely no additions. It's just grape juice that's been fermented. There's a measure of total sulphur dioxide at bottling that's less than 10 grams per litre. So if they're not adding sulphur dioxide, that is the sulphur dioxide that's being produced naturally during fermentation. In fact, they're not relying on SO2 to stabilise the wine. They're relying on the fact that tannins will have been drawn out of the skins during that extended maceration, along with the wine's natural acidity and the alcohol present, to give this wine a natural stability. There's no fining and no filtration, so they warn us to expect plenty of sediment. Certainly looking at that, the wine looks hazy. So I've actually been fairly careful to try not to stir it up, although it's still obviously produced a cloudy wine here. So the wine was bottled in October 2020. All this bottling was done by hand. The wine is bottled under natural cork, there's no screw cap, and then they've used beeswax to create a seal over that. And this is a limited production wine. Evidently they only made 1,200 bottles. So let's have a look at it, shall we? I mean, the first thing to say is to look at it. It almost looks like a sort of makes me think of cloudy cider anyway. It's got this sort of quite rich amber colour. Certainly cloudy. As I swirl it, there are some bits of CO2 appear to come off there. Looking at it on the glass, it is forming some tears. The label only says this is 12.5% alcohol, so it's not particularly high alcohol. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? Gosh, the aromas are very particular. Again, aromas along the lines of sort of cider, that sort of thing. Ripe apples, ripe pears. Almost getting through to a sort of peachy note. Almost sort of top notes of honey and caramel. Perhaps a touch of ginger in there. So let's have a taste. The wine is dry, it's got some really fresh acidity, and it's got a tannic structure. It would be light to medium bodied probably in terms of red, but it is giving some grip at the front of the mouth. There's almost sort of a slightly chalky texture. Again, it's making me think of ripe pears, particularly the skin of a pear, the outside, the drying way that the skin of a pear is like that. There's a warmth coming through from the alcohol there. There's an extent to which the sort of now bruised apple sort of notes, and the acidity almost makes me think of sort of styles of Chenin. And that's probably actually a pointer to the fact the acidity is really good and fresh here. I wouldn't say there was any sweetness in this whatsoever. And in some ways the tannic grip and the texture is slightly closing up the fruit on the wine. Certainly those elements are lasting quite well. There's almost a honeyed richness to the back palate. It lacks a sort of a syrupy sweet element. There are some complex notes there that make me think of honey, honeysuckle. And that drying finish is lasting really quite well. I think that's a wine whose grip would make it go really nicely with a range of cheeses actually. Both sort of beautiful soft goat's cheeses, but also well-aged firmer cheeses like Comté and things like that. I find it really quite interesting in terms of sort of the drying sensation in my mouth. There's almost a gingery note left. It's not necessarily a style I drink a lot of, but it's one that, if it's well made, as I think this is, offers a wonderful range of options in terms of food matching because of the wine's weight and its richness. I wasn't sure when I first opened it, given that this is a 2020, so it's coming up to being 5 years old, how well it would have fared in terms of retaining its freshness and its fruit. Clearly, if I'm talking about notes of being a bit like sort of a cider and that sort of thing, those are oxidative notes that I'm thinking of there. But there's still plenty of flavour and freshness here, and I think it's probably reasonable to expect this is a wine that will continue to offer some really nice drinking for the next couple of years. I did take a look at the winesearcher aggregated critic score for this, and that's coming in at 92 out of 100. And I think I'm totally in agreement with that. This is a wine that has some weight, some richness, some length, some nice complexity. It's certainly giving me plenty to think about. I'll enjoy finishing it up. So thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've found the tasting of interest. If you have enjoyed it, do please press the like button below. If you'd like to watch more of these tastings, it would be fantastic if you could take the time to subscribe to the channel, and that way you could also set yourself an alert and you'd be notified every time I publish a new tasting. If you have any comments you'd like to leave, if you know of wines with even more unusual names and backgrounds than this one, if you have any comments you want to make about orange wines or anything else related to tasting, it would be great to hear from you. If you have any friends you think might be interested by the tasting, do please feel free to pass the video on to them. So once again, thank you for joining me, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time. Come and join us for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.